So my name is Beth Fisher Yoshida, and I am the program director of the NECR, Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Master's Program at Columbia University. We have a series of monthly webinars, and today I'm really excited to introduce some of our alumni to the platform to talk about their stories from before they came to the program, while they're in the program, and then what they're doing now after the program. Today, we're talking about from theory to practice. And so people work in different fields. And so they're in the world of practice. They come to the academy, they come to a master's program, for example, and then they gain some theory to inform their practice. And our program, the NECR, which is short for Negotiation and Conflict Resolution, is really built on the model of a scholar practitioner. And that means that we integrate theory and practice as best we can. So people have a way of applying theory to their practice or understanding theory through their practice and so on. So it should be a very fluid movement back and forth. So the two people I'd like to invite today, one at a time, of course, would be Rosie Chawla, who is a graduate of the program, and she'll talk about the exciting work she's doing, and Brian Galindo. So I'm going to turn it over now to Rosie. And I do want to say one thing before I do turn it over is that please feel free to write questions and comments into the Q&A. They will each present for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a little bit of a conversation across their presentations. And we really do welcome your input from the audience so that we can see what is it that you have a question about, what comments do you have, and that will help keep the conversation lively. So now I'll turn it over to Rosie, who will go through her presentation for about 10 minutes, and then Bryant will join in afterwards. Rosie?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Yoshida and the SBS team for this opportunity. My name is Rosie, and it's great to be at this webinar because when I was a student, I used to attend all these webinars and never thought I would end up on this webinar, because when you come join a program, you are really anxious because this program is amazing and you learn so much. So thank you so much for this opportunity. So the first thing, how this presentation is going to go, is going to talk about the Columbia journey, just like Dr. Yoshida mentioned, how I got in, the middle, and the end. And hopefully you will find this useful as you are doing your programs or as you are thinking about this program as well. So the first thing I want to tell you that I actually came into the program as a very seasoned professional with 19 years of business experience. I was working in the lending field. My role was heavily in client relations, and I saw conflicts all the time. I was actually one of the mature students in the class. I wasn't one of those one with 5 years or 7 years experience. I actually had been in senior management. I have been demoted, promoted, suspended quite a few times in my line of career, and I'm not embarrassed to admit that, because everything will make sense as I go through about my journey at Columbia. But I was really made a lot of financial sacrifices to actually do this program. And this was my third acceptance into Columbia. I had been accepted twice into the Millman Public School of Health before joining this program. I had taken the pain of taking the GMATs and getting accepted, but then I couldn't do those programs because of my work commitment. As I said, I had a mortgage, I had a car payment, I was living with my family, and it was a big financial sacrifice. But this program was flexible enough that allowed me to work while I did this program. So what were the strengths of that coming into the program? I had firsthand experience in failing at solving conflicts in the business world. Firsthand experience. I had firsthand experience of not knowing how to mediate, how to negotiate, how to do self-advocacy, zero idea. And here I am, 19 years in the business world, having gone through amazing first-class business trainings by business experts. And here I am, I can tell you, I walked in the program with nothing I learned in this program. So as you are in your careers and in your organizations and in your corporations, you might see a conflict resolution class. Let me tell you that compared to the program, I think now is not very real. It's fake. I think it's fake. But that's just my opinion, but it goes to show you the richness of this program. The things that I thought this program really helped me with was conflict resolution skills, people building skills, negotiation skills, advocacy skills, collaboration skills, and mediation skills. And these were the skills I learned throughout my journey at Columbia, which became this career that I'm about to share with you that ended up blossoming and becoming. So while I was in the program, I intensely wanted to gain a lot of knowledge out of the program. I was very serious about that. I felt I wanted to internalize that knowledge and externalize that knowledge. I sat with every professor in my program during the program, asking them about their career path, asking them what publications and listservs should I read. I found my professors to be such humble educators that I was really drawn to them. I was drawn to the way they taught. I felt like with every class, my heart and mind changed. And this is really real for me. I say that to everybody. I transformed through the program with the knowledge and the theories that I was learning. I didn't understand every theory in Dr. Coleman's class, but whatever I understood, I knew it was enough for me to keep going forward. The one thing I did was I researched the professional part of the field very early. I had to know, where was I going to go? How was I going to do things? And I realized that this is a very strong field, but there were lawyers doing conflict resolution and mediation skills. There were people in a lot of different spaces, and this was a field that was seeing light in a lot of different disciplines. And I wasn't qualified for those jobs, but it gave me an idea that this was a burgeoning field and there was a need for this almost everywhere I looked. And that was eye-opening for me. The one thing I want to just tell you about this slide is I learned self-advocacy in this program. And I think this is something that I would not have learned had I not done this program. And the other thing I would encourage you to do is read the books and the articles your professors are writing or suggesting or publishing. This was life-changing for me to actually gain practical knowledge aside from my own Columbia classes. So this is the middle, all right? Now, how did I choose to internalize and externalize the knowledge I was receiving? Some of the things I did during my program at Columbia, I interned for Kimberly Crenshaw at Columbia Law School to start her now national claimed campaign called Say Her Name. I was the assistant to the director of community impact at Columbia. I joined a freshman lab to work on water problems in Nepal. I did curriculum design and teaching for Double Discovery. It's an effort that teaches underprivileged kids to come on campus and take classes. I did a SEPA competition while I was at Columbia with a SEPA group called Impact. I took a role in the journalism school who was investigating conflicts in part of the United States where water was causing cancer in high rates. It was a pro bono internship, but I took it to apply my conflict resolution skills and knowledge. I became a rapporteur for the Columbia. It's an institution next to the law school that invites professionals all the time and they have meetings. It's a very competitive position, but I took that. I also joined local conflict resolution groups in and around New York to gain some real knowledge of applying the things that I was learning, okay? During Columbia, I went and did work for United Nations of Office of Drugs and Crime in Myanmar, where I lived there for 6 months. And this is the pivotal of my career. I actually was a conflict researcher. And my first job was to draft a document called conflict sensitivity analysis. And here's what I realized. Everything I learned in the program was everything I needed to do this assignment. Conflict sensitivity analysis is 101 conflict resolution. Here's what I learned during my time at the UN working for UNODC. I was the only one with that knowledge. So I not only had to do what they wanted me to do, but I also had to teach them, the UN high-level people, about terminology, about what the report needed, what type of information needed to go on the report for our Paris donors to accept our project and not reject it. I had to mediate with locals and internals who were working on Myanmar in this conflict resolution space to get knowledge out of them and then be able to synthesize that knowledge into a conflict sensitivity analysis. What came in very handy for me, the classes, if I had to go back and look, definitely Dr. Coleman with Theory of Cooperation and Competition, Self and Instrument class by Dr. Anderson, Dr. Barry Sommers class, and of course my mediation class over with Michelle Riley, Professor Riley. Outside the UN, I actually got invited to design a conflict resolution for youth living in post-conflict societies. And then I ended up with working with local peace builders. But I don't think I would have had this knowledge and experience had I not been in this program. So something I think people should know how relative this program was in my career. Right after, well, before this, I got invited in 2017 to Palestine by a human rights organization. They selected 15 people from various different countries, where I learned about conflict resolution initiatives and strategies in Palestine. I met over 20 different organizations, sat with them, learned their work, and see how we could collaborate and advance peacemaking in Palestine. As you know, that's one of those conflicts. From there, I was recruited to go to China. It's funny, China was where everything comes into a very pivot, where everything I learned, China was the place that needed it. In China, I wasn't supposed to do what I ended up doing. I was hired in the education space to design curriculums. And one of the curriculums I pitched for was conflict resolution and peace. And they said, we don't know what that's about, but as long as you don't get us in trouble, we'd be happy to take in your ideas and stuff. Well, we not only did that, but I ended up doing over 50 activism events in China with a lot of different groups of people, including the US consulate. We ended up doing a lot of curriculums, field programs, opportunities that were related to conflict resolution, peace, equality, equity, minority rights, LGBTQ communities. I got access to local peace and equality activists that we will not name. And that's how the work in China really grew. And this brings me to my last part because my time is over. From China, I got recruited to UNESCO Center for Peace China office. Basically, it's to expand their mission of peace building and peace education throughout China, and they were having a hard time with. From there, we're still doing what we're doing, but my time's ended. So thank you for this, and I'll pass on to Brian.
Thank you, Rosie. We'll have time to talk afterwards. And now, Bryant.
Yes, thank you for that, Rosie. So I'll share my screen. Give me a second. So my presentation is going to be a little different from Rosie's. It's going to be more walking through my entrepreneur journey after the program and looking at how I took a lot of the themes and the skills that I learned in the program and applied it from an entrepreneur lens. And so here you'll see me at the program. Every student has to do a capstone presentation. So I graduated in 2015, and I entered the program knowing that I wanted to do organizational development, organizational conflict resolution, yet I didn't have a lot of experience in the field. And if anything, I had 2 years of professional experience as a paralegal. So I was very bright-eyed, new, not really knowing what I didn't know. And so I took the program and I basically was like, I'm applying this program in every which way into an organizational lens, which led me to develop what I called an open conflict resolution or an open conflict management system for my capstone, which actually ended up helping me later on. So after I graduated, a few months afterwards, I created a brand called Workplace Collaborations. And this brand, I kind of started out with the thesis, which was that, you know, I feel like there's going to be people out there in the world that could benefit from working with an individual that was my age, and who would benefit from that other people who are around my age. I had a lot of friends that worked in the startup field, and all of these individuals were, very headstrong, very intelligent. And I also knew that when they had conflict, that they didn't really want to work with someone who was much older for some reason. I don't know why, but they felt like they wanted to work with someone younger. And I had a friend of mine who actually had a conflict between his co-founder, and he was like, "Hey, Bryant, conflict resolution. Do you want to come in and help me with this conflict?" And I was like, "All right, sure, why not?" And back in that day, I didn't even use Zoom. I don't even know if Zoom existed, but we had Skype, and one person was in Alaska, another person was Montana. I was in Los Angeles, which is where I am now. And I ended up helping them mediate basically their co-founder dispute. And afterwards, he comes to me and he's like, "Bryant, you know what? I realized that if I'm having this issue, there's possibly other people who are also having this issue. I think you need to do something with this." At that time, I was like, "All right, why not? Let's try it out." And I've, I say that entrepreneurship found me. I didn't go looking for entrepreneurship, because he basically put it in my head that I was like, "Oh, maybe I can try this." And so over the course of the next few months, what I ended up doing was going live on like Facebook. I was reading a book by Russell Branson, I believe his name is, who's all about how do you put your zone of genius out into the world in order to capture and captivate audiences. And one of the things he kind of advocates for is that you as an individual already have a platform, right? The economy, at least in that time in 2016, was very new around like the gig economy, like working virtually, right? It was kind of like this vogue idea, and he's like, utilize this because the economy is changing, and you as a creator need to use the platforms you already have available to you in order to go and put your message out into the world. So that's what I ended up doing, and I ended up gaining some followers, even some people that wanted to learn more. And I ended up creating a beta persuasive negotiation skills masterclass, which ended up negotiating and working through real life business problems, since each one of those individuals was a business owner. And that basically helped me start developing my own curriculum and my own kind of like coaching modality within my business, which ended up getting me noticed by one of my cohort mates who ended up graduating with me. She's like, "Brian, I'm seeing you posting all these things on Facebook. Like, we could actually really use your help." And lo and behold, she worked at UNITAR, which was the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, and was like, "We need someone to actually come on board to help us teach people virtually." Like, and our consultant who was going to work with us actually went AWOL. So is this something you can do? Over the course of a few conversations between her and the director, I came on board and I ended up creating a curriculum for them that is now used in their master's in humanitarian and peace building. So that was really cool. And it also just kind of gave me more chops, right? It's helped me understand that, oh, I can build these things out because, at that age, I had a little bit of imposter syndrome because I was like, am I really qualified to do this? But it all started kind of building upon one another and helping me. And then eventually I ended up trademarking my own conflict resolution process called collaborative disagreement, which is the basis of the book that I'm also launching later this year, as well as a main coaching program that I teach co-founders at a very high level. So, as we're going through this, right, there's some dates here so you can kind of get reference points. So it's 2017. I'm still building out the apparatus for my business, and these things start getting me more noticed. And I start going on podcasts and going more on lives with other thought influencers. So I was really building this capacity for trying to not only capture my ideal client, but also understand their specific pain points, which is all about the entrepreneur. Like, how can you write to their pain points? And so that was my goal up until this time. Establish thought leadership, be the person that people know that they can come to for any type of co-founder issue, startup issue. And I just started writing a lot. And I ended up seeing that there was a really big, oh, can you guys not see my slides? I'm so sorry. Someone said they can't see the slides.
You put it in presentation mode, it might help.
Oh, I did put it in presentation mode. Um, can you see this now?
We can see your slide, but it's still not in presentation mode. Yeah, if you hit that, that
I
might work.
did.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm not
not
sure.
sure. Hmm.
Your slides, but they weren't moving before, but now they are.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. So I'll just make that bigger. I don't know why it's not doing that. So, um, couldn't see it. Sorry about that. So I started writing for different pain points for my clients. And I realized that for a lot of my potential clients, a lot of the pain points that they were looking for online couldn't, they were very old. So a lot of the articles online were like about 6, 7 years old. And so what I ended up doing was writing for them, and then my articles would rank really high. So these are just some of the articles that you can find. So I started doing keyword searches. So if you do co-founder disagreements, co-founder conflict resolution, co-founder negotiations, my articles rank really high. So what that meant was that at the end of the day, they could find me, and then at the end of the article, there was a lead magnet. So if they wanted to learn more about my services, they could actually reach out and have a conversation. And so that helped me be able to start actually getting my first big clients, which was my first one was out in Boston. So this was a 5-figure contract. I ended up working with them for over a year, and it went really well. And I started gaining more experience until I eventually ended up rebranding my original brand from Workplace Collaborations to Collabs HQ in 2018. Because interestingly enough, one of my startup clients told me, so your email address is way too long and I don't like writing it. You should just think about that, because if you're going to be working with startups, you like really short emails. And I was like, all right, sure, why not? And that kind of just started a whole avalanche of thought. And so I ended up rebranding to Collabs HQ, which is my brand is now. And then to date, I've worked with 36 companies in over a dozen countries, in different realms of conflict resolution, specifically around co-founder equity disputes, partnership dissolutions, breach of contract claims, and general partnership dispute resolution, as well as now I'm working with more clients and how to embed like the organizational development work that I also did, like around conflict management and understanding, hey, we need a process for not only giving feedback openly, but also how do we do that in a way that's scalable? So if we're going to be giving feedback to one another, can we also do it in a way that automates it, that brings in different technology to help us be able to do that? So that's a little bit of my journey. And sorry about the slides. I didn't realize that. So thank you for whomever said that.
Thanks, Bryant. So now we can come back with Rosie, Bryant, and myself. That would be great. Okay. So, yeah, so thank you so much for sharing all that. And there were a couple of questions in the chat, but before we get to those, I just wanted to know, did you have anything you wanted to reflect on or say to each other? Because I think that there were some overlaps in some of the way you got started in what you're doing, even though one is more entrepreneurial than the other, but still you're both entrepreneurs in different ways. Anything that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think from Rosie's presentation, what comes to my mind is that, you come in with a zest or a yearning. And I think that the best individuals who really harness this program take that zest and yearning and apply what they learn and just go do it. Right. You kind of have to have the hustler mentality. I think New York breeds that a lot. And I know I did. I worked for the EEOC, I was working full time while going to school full time. It was not easy. I definitely felt burnt out at times, but it's 2 years, and it's like a marathon and you have to go for it. And I think from Rosie's presentation, that reminded me so much of like the go-getterness. You have to just put yourself out there and make the program what you want it to be.
Right. And Rosie?
I would like to add, just having Bryant talk about what he was able to do will prove the point I started my presentation with, that I was in the business world and conflict resolution, conflict management, a curriculum, a way for organizations to handle employees on a large scale, particularly senior level and middle level employees like me that were growing up within the business world, is so missing. And thank you, Brian, for doing what you do. And I hope to work with some of the companies you've taught this to, because if you graduated from our program, I think they got the real thing. So I just want to say, going back to what Brian said, we both were working. So I think everybody walking in this program, I do want to say to everybody that's listening right now, you are all making a significant amount of sacrifices to do what you're doing. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel for everybody, but you do have to commit to making the program applicable to, you know, what you are doing, what you are seeing, what you are finding, what you are not finding. You know, I think some parts of this degree may not belong in certain fields yet, but that doesn't mean you're not the door opener. But then that also doesn't mean you can successfully open that door in a short time. And I'll just leave it that.
Yeah, to build on what you're saying. So I think what happens is when people come to the program, there's an intentional consciousness to focus on negotiation and conflict resolution, right? I mean, there should be, that's why you're there. In the outside world, outside the program, which is the rest of the world, it could be in the business world, it could be in NGO organizations, any kind of organizational context, it can be in communities, it can be in families and so on. That's not the priority. Not that conflict is the priority. They don't want the conflict, but learning the skills and all that is not the priority. So for example, if you are a manager in an organization, your role is to manage others. If you're a frontline worker and whatever it is you're doing, you have goals and objectives that you need to achieve, but conflict just gets in the way, but it's not necessarily a priority to deal with conflict resolution, although of course it should be because it's getting in the way and we understand the cost of conflict. But I see that over and over again, and it is amazing once you know something about it, you can never go back to not knowing about it. And now you have to just choose, am I going to do something about it? So what I appreciated also about what both of you have talked about was that when you're in the program, it's not only the richness of the classes or the reading materials or the faculty, who I think were wonderful in the program, but also that you went beyond the program and you did other things to get real work experience, real experience on it, even if it was voluntary and you didn't have it today. So one of the questions in the chat was saying, okay, well, especially when Rosie was talking that you did all these things on campus, but what if I don't have access to campus, right? And because we have people who are in the hybrid program, and so they're not on campus except for a couple of weeks in a residency. I mean, I have some responses to that, but I want to hear from the both of you as well. Like, okay, so you can't be on campus. How else do you think people might try to venture out and get some real tangible experience?
I could take
Yeah.
that first.
Yeah,
Okay. So I think what you're experiencing being in a hybrid program is what the world is going through right now since COVID, right? And we both are working in the conflict resolution field, and we're actually doing this question that you're asking, right? How are you finding work? How are you finding opportunities? I want to tell you, research skills, LinkedIn, searching for certain, for example, if you go on LinkedIn right now, look for an opportunity to design a conflict resolution curriculum pro bono for an NGO, right? So what I'm encouraging is everybody wants paid opportunities, and they will come to you once you can show credibility that you can do this at another level for someone else. And I think I want to encourage everybody that's looking for opportunities. Now, if getting paid is all that you want to focus on, then what I would encourage you to do is reach out to the alumni network, reach out and look at paid opportunities. I know for conflict resolution, a lot of paid opportunities could be in writing articles about conflict resolution and conflict strategies. It could be being a co-founder's assistant. Believe it or not, all you're doing in that role is conflict resolution. You know, it is a very highly role where you have to manage conflict. If you are working in a field already, do you want to pitch employee training on conflicts to your employer, you know, and then negotiating a rate that is acceptable to you? But don't stop with your or organization, go to competitors, go to new industries and pitch the same thing. So I would say self-advocacy, guys. That's all.
And Brian, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm just gonna frame it from my perspective, which is that, it took me 3 years to be able to build out a brand and a business that actually was able to be self-sustaining in any way. I also wanted to be a mediator. And I remember that everyone told me, it's gonna take a lot of time. You have to be patient, but you have to be willing to put the foundation down. And I think in our society today, there's kind of this like, let's just get it done now type of mentality. And I think there's a benefit to that, as well as a frame that could otherwise color your perspective, which is that sometimes it will take you some time. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't stop trying and do the informational interviews. Try out like going online and seeing what you can do and see what magic happens. Because I know I'm here because of the connections I made, not only through this program, but through my network, just putting myself out there. And even next week, I have a call set up with an ADR firm to be possibly put on their panel. And I was only put on there because I did a free co-mediation with someone because they needed a Spanish speaker. And I was like, oh, I speak Spanish. I'll help you out. You don't have to pay me. That's fine. And she remembered me and she's like, you did great work, and now is recommending me. And so I think when it comes to the hybrid system, don't see it so much as a liability, but as an asset, because our world is shifting and the work requirements are shifting, and people out there, like, you can get different types of work now because everyone now is more used to remote type working. And if it requires networking, talking to people, there are resources out there to create those scripts. If you have hesitancy around, well, how do I reach out to someone and cold message them on LinkedIn? There's already so many things, so many resources out there to help you. Just put your head down, keep doing it, and know that you can be successful.
Yeah, great. So I know that when I started my business a million years ago, right, that you have to give a lot in order to get. And what you both talked about was your generosity of spirit, and that you didn't say, what are you going to do for me? You said, no, let me do something. And then what you're doing in turn is demonstrating your skills. And I remember from 2 million years ago when I was in undergraduate school and in my earlier degree, somebody said to me, it takes 3 years to really get anything going. And you just mentioned that, Brian, too, is that it really is like the first year figuring out what is going on here. The second year you try to, take some leads on things. And the third year you start to get into a rhythm. And it really does take 3 years. So while I come from New York and patience is not the main leading attribute of people from New York, but you do need patience. And eventually what happens is you start to realize you have built up a network, you have built up some content, and you're talking about the different articles and programs that you've developed, and all of that does eventually come together. And I do take your point about remote, and there is a big conversation in the field about ODR, right, online dispute resolution. And can you do this online? And being online, especially in the past couple of years with the pandemic, has increased conflict in certain contexts also because of people not being able to be online. In organizations, people are saying, how do I know that the people who work in my organization are really working and they're not just hanging out and watching TV or something, right? So those kinds of issues around performance have come up too.
Yeah.
Another question in the chat was about cultural differences. I think it came up when Rosie was speaking at first because of the work internationally, but I know, Brian, you've also done work with different people and different groups of people. And even when you think about industry cultures as well, and you're talking about startups, there's a different kind of being. And Brian, you also mentioned that you work with companies around the world. So if both of you can speak to how have you, maybe some tangible ways, addressed some kind of cultural differences in the work that you've done? Maybe,
so I always reference a book called The Culture Map, because it's a really strong asset for being able to understand not only different contexts of communication. So I will tell you a story. I had to mediate a conversation between two business founders that one was in Indonesia and another in Singapore. And it was not my forte in many ways. I don't have a lot of exposure to that type of culture. And the one thing is that they had a lot of suppliers in the United States. And so that's why they needed someone who knew kind of the US context too for their negotiation. And so bridging those kind of cultural differences, I think starts with a willingness to be curious. You know, what don't you know? And when it came for me, like relying on that book and relying on kind of also, I think we had advanced negotiation. We talked about that, Beth. You were my professor. I don't know if you remember. Yeah, and we talked about that as well. And remembering that, like, when it comes to cultural differences, at least in my lens of working with people, also I've had clients in the Middle East and Europe, some in Africa, that like coming at it with a kind and human heart that's humble, curious, allows me to start to do the work of just building rapport, you know, because there's so much tension, there's obviously fear, and while they might not, at least with this Asian client, show it to you, you can feel it, right? And how they react to you. So you as the conflict intervener must also come at it with a place of like, I am going to demonstrate what is the best practice so that we can meet in the middle.
Great, thanks. And Rosie?
I would say I'll revert back to the program. One of the classes that really helped me with this was Dr. Barry Sommers and Self as Instrument class. And the reason for that is those classes made me question who I am and what is the culture I have grown up in. So if you want to be able to be a person that fits into other cultures and you want to be that person that change agent in different cultures, which I ended up getting a lot of opportunities to do, working with over 17 to 20 countries at a time. I have global calls weekly. We're meeting with new partners. We're expanding in the US now as well. I would say, understand that the world, you and I, and this conference is now happening, is a highly progressive, democratic, free country where we are able to express our opinions and say and question anything we want. And it is allowed and it is actually encouraged. But when you step out of America, and even if you go to what you think are Western countries, let me tell you, my experience in London, in Paris, and in Norway showed me that is not their culture. That is not their culture. So the one thing to understand is you cannot be an American in the space. You got to be a person in the space. And what is that person? That person is the qualities Brian mentioned. You show humility by listening. You show curiosity by asking questions instead of going by your assumptions of what you see and or a stereotype that you might know. You learn to accept people when they tell you, you know, you give your opinions too much and I don't appreciate it. You take the clues that people are giving you with their silence and understand whatever you were trying to say or the way you said it didn't really set well, and you learn from those errors. Are you always going to be prepared to go to a new culture? And I just worked a team in Africa. It's a nomadic tribe. They ended up reaching me on LinkedIn. They wanted an FGM strategy. I worked with them pro bono for 2 years. They won national awards. Then they started a women income empowerment program. You look at the world I live in, you look at the world they live in, and how did we come together? Well, I came together with taking their yelling. I did. I had to learn how to communicate effectively. And that's not always going to come because I know the answers. That's mostly going to come is because I witnessed, I listened, I waited, and then I carefully drafted a response that was relative to the work that we were trying to do. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's.
So yeah, the both of you mentioned a couple of things I just want to pick up on. And one of them was the whole idea about self-awareness. And that is something I know we stress on the program. It's very dear to my heart. And that is something that is constantly being evolved if you pay attention to it. And when you're talking about all of your varied experiences, I can hear that you're learning as you're going along, and you're learning not only about the people you're working with and their culture, but you're learning about yourself when you see your response and your reaction to them and thinking, okay, now what do I do? Where do I go with this now? So that constant evolving opportunity is great. The other thing I heard you say was that you don't have to know the answers. And I find that that's actually a relief that you don't have to know all the answers. How could we possibly know the answers when it's not our conflict and it's not necessarily our culture. Now, we may feel responsible to helping them find the answer, and that's okay, but not to know the answer. So something I think that maybe you can both speak about is, what are some of the tools or tactics you use to guide people towards being able to get to where they need to go to discover things, right? So it's being sensitive to, yes, what do they need to have emerge on their own, and what is it we need to create the opportunity for it to emerge? So sort of push it a little bit. You can just give an example from each of your experiences that you've done. Like, what are some of the go-to things you do, if there is something?
I can take that one first. One of the things I have had to do to pick projects and people and partnerships that I know will see the light of day is I do an assessment call, couple of assessment calls. And that's not, you would think by the way I'm calling it, I'm assessing the client. It's actually the opposite. I want client to assess me. And I say this very humbly. It's because I ask a lot of, and I learned this in the program through my mediation classes when I was practicing to become a mediator. Like Brian, I had aspirations to become, whether it was pro bono or paid mediator, because I felt like mediation changed my life. But you know, I used some of those mediation and negotiation things and theories that I learned in the program and role play to kind of you know, probe them with what is really they're after. What is their position in that country and context? What are their barriers to what they're trying to achieve? What has been their methods that have been unsuccessful? And what have they learned from that process? And first of all, the one thing I really need to know is what Dr. Yoshida, you just mentioned. Are they open enough to creating a new method with me? This is a big question because nobody has the answers. I don't have answers of FGM, but I believe if you work with me and tell me about your context and your difficulties, where do we need buy-in from? Who are the people that are pushing these practices, and where is the advocacy failing in the context where you live in? You know, I ended up creating dialogue circles for them, which ended up reducing FGM by 60%. You know, this is huge numbers for a small community. I mean, I was receiving horrible pictures of girls crying and blades. It was gut wrenching to sit and take that all in and then be able to go to a meeting, but always go with probing, I would say. Always go with understanding your own limits. You don't know FGM. You're not going to be able to stop that practice, but you do have a chance to help them create something that's theirs, that they can do with the skills and knowledge they can have. I don't have time to put them through the Columbia program, unfortunately, but I can represent some light of the program to them from the people I learned and the books that I read. And sometimes not all of that is applicable. Sometimes they're teaching you what they need. So that always helps me. Those are my assessment calls.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. And Bryant?
Yeah, you know, like Rosie, so when a client comes to me, they've already been primed through a lot of my content online. So I already somehow know what their pain points are through the very nature of my intake process. And when we have that first discovery call, you know, I'm trying to understand their situation in as much as they're trying to understand me. Am I the right fit? And I try to think of the conflict resolution theories and techniques and everything we learned as kind of little files in my filing cabinet in my mind. And, you know, I'm like, oh, okay, that's real, or that's representative, right? And you're just like, but you kind of hold your cards close to you because you also need to see and be curious as to what does this client really need. And I wear many hats in what I do. I work as a consultant, as a coach, as a mediator. And so if the client is working with me and they sign the retainer, they know that they are working with me within all of these different modalities. And I will physically in the call be like, okay, I'm wearing my coaching hat now, I'm wearing like this, so that they understand that I'm going to come at it differently. And it's always about asking those deeper questions, right? And so kind of like what you were mentioning, Rosie, it's like you're asking questions to elicit some sort of response, and whether that's an aha moment or a different perspective, you know, you're constantly doing that. And I think that was a strength, is that as a conflict resolution practitioner, you might think you know, but really you don't. And actually from that space, it's actually very beneficial. And I had one client who was a CEO of a $1 million e-commerce startup out in New York, actually. And she came to me, she's like, can you just help me with this conflict? I need the answers. I'm like, all right, like, let me see what you need, right? And so we go through the entire process. And at the end of the day, she's like, oh, I had the answers all inside of me. Oh, thank you. And I was like, there you go, right? Because we're just reflecting what's already inside of you, knowing and applying our knowledge to at least give you the frameworks, the tools, the scripts, whatever you need to also birth that empowerment within yourself.
Great, thanks, Grant. So both of you talking about also, I was thinking, all right, so whoever we work with, even in our own worlds, there are constraints. There are some things that can be done and some things that can't. There are limitations. And building on the self-awareness theme as well, a lot of, I think, the work that we do and in working with people is to help them think about their situations differently, right? To shift their frame and to help them reframe something, even though they may not have total control, they do have control over themselves and how they see it. So can you give any examples as to something you might have done as a technique or a case where that happened, where maybe somebody did realize I knew the answers all along, but I didn't realize those were the answers and why? How did people have that shift which helped them deal with their situations better from the work that
Yeah, I can give one. So I was working with this 2-person team. I'm just going to call the guy David. And so David was this headstrong individual. He was an immigrant and he wanted to exit the business. And he just didn't know when and for how much, right? So this was a startup that was going to go get an extra round of financing, and that meant a lot of money. And so his 50% of the business was worth a lot, but he didn't want to be there anymore. And he couldn't understand how to resolve this conflict within himself. And it was impacting the negotiations. He kept dragging it on and on. And eventually I was like, you know, let's just do some one-on-one work here and really see what's driving this, you know, this need of yours and what is going on. And you know, I was just asking him questions, being very curious, and what came out was like, you know, I am a child of immigrants. My parents told me that I needed to be somebody. If I leave right now, I'm nobody. You know, even if I get $1 million, $2 million as my exit package, what am I going to show for it? And my family is really not going to, you know, see the value in that. You know, so he was really struggling, not so much with like the exit negotiation, but actually what his parents and what his family was going to think about him if he left. And that aha moment, which I was like, well, do you feel comfortable sharing that with your co-founder? And eventually he said yes, and he shared it, allowed for some empathy from the co-founder to be like, okay, so then how do we help you save face, you know, while allowing you to exit the business and also make our next round of financing possible. And they like structured a deal that was so like convoluted, had so many steps, but it was able to like hit all those 3 points. And they were like, we did it, you know? And to me, that was a great example of like the conflict you think you're having may actually be covering the conflict that's actually underneath.
Nice, great example. And Rosie, do you have an example about reframing?
Yeah, so when you talked about, well, you working a lot of, you know, opportunities and constraints, I felt like saying, well, last 6 years I've been working with constraints. Actually, there's been nothing but constraints. There's still a lot of constraints in my work. So I think to help you frame it in a bit more realistic way is a lot of times I'm getting a lot of people that are actually seeing no hope for what they're trying to do. They have tried, they're out of money, they're out of resources, they're out of ideas, and they're at the brink of just talking to me to see, are you able to even do anything for me for the things I'm trying to do? Whether it's wanting to work on human trafficking where they live as far as advocacy, whether it's stopping child marriages in Nepal, which I worked with the co-founder while I was in China. We did a few projects in Nepal. So I'm getting people where they're at a real delicate and fragile spaces of change makers. They are wanting to be change makers, but they are facing a lot of constraints, right? So one of the ways I always, and this is something I learned in the program, something Brian had said earlier, like you think you know something, but you don't. And I felt like throughout my Columbia program, I kind of was reminded every day. I thought I knew what, you know, a professor was asking, but I really didn't know. So I became comfortable in those years at Columbia being the person in the room who really doesn't know. And I became comfortable in my skin accepting that, because I think that takes the ego and pride out of the way for you. And I think that's important if you are wanting to do this work, because your ego and pride with your Columbia name and degree is really doing its own magic digitally on LinkedIn and all of that. But in reality, we all know for the work that at least I wanted to do out of this program humbled me so much that I didn't want all of that. I actually wanted to do meaningful work. So one of the ways I am able to help people reframe is that I just go back to using role play and asking a lot of probing questions. You know, I'll create a perfect scenario and say, is this the scenario you need to be successful? You know, it's getting them to tell me what they think are the missing pieces. Once they tell me in a list of what there are big missing pieces, we really look at them and say, do you really need that piece? Is there something in you already that we don't need this piece? Do we really need the government supporting you? Or do we actually need the villagers in the room or your local community organizations and schools and leaders to kind of give you credibility and support to what you're trying to do? Because changing laws and policy, we know even in the United States, yes, it's impactful, but it's the people on the ground that turn those things impactful by utilizing them, by enforcing them, by believing in them. So a lot of times my work in the way of reframing is, are your obstacles really the obstacles? You know, what are really your obstacles? It's redefining their obstacles, which then automatically redefines their goals, which then automatically helps them see the skills they have to achieve whatever they want to achieve. And this happened over and over again, starting from UN in Myanmar to doing the local programs in Palestine. And I just saw that this was like working, and it's still working. And that's how I'm able to do it.
So it sounds like it's great stories from both of you, that some of the skills that you're bringing are helping people realize that you think there's a wall there, but there's really no wall. And here's a way of seeing beyond what you think of those obstacles. So we had two different people asking in the chat about the UN, and I guess the UN system, because we say the UN, but we know that there's a lot going on inside the UN with the secretariat and the agencies and all that kind of stuff. And the UN is a very attractive place for many people who would like to get some experience there in some way or another. So they're just kind of asking for, like, what are some ways in which you think there might be an opportunity to, whether I guess it's an internship, I mean, I'm adding that part, and whatever it is, to do something with the UN. What are some, do you have any advice based on how you were?
I'll take that. So like all of you listening and maybe asking this question, I was hungry for the UN. I came to Columbia into this program with this goal. I want to go work for the UN. I had a very tunnel vision. And let me tell you, I got rejected from every UN internship I applied, every one of it while I was in the program. Okay, so what were the things that helped me? First of all, if you want the UN, there's a UN recruiter that I actually know and have worked with last few years, is the only one I will hire to do my resumes. He did hiring for the UN for 15 years. Finding a recruiter that actually did the hiring for the UN to help you draft a UN style resume is huge. UN will probably give you a glance, and you actually have a higher opportunity of a callback if you know how to style a UN resume. One thing I will encourage you is a lot of times UN is actually hiring people who actually have experience in their competitor organization. UNESCO Center for Peace recruited me from China, not because I graduated Columbia and was new, but because of the work I did for a private organization in China, which something the success and the work that I did for them is what they wanted to be. So I encourage you, if you can't get to the UN right now and you don't want to do an unpaid internship, go for human rights, human advocacy, cultural diplomacy, inclusion, diversity, race relations type of organizations, and get the skills that are actually quite useful to the UN. I know one of the skills they're constantly looking for is monitoring and evaluation. That's a big skill you'll see UN is hiring for. Research, investigative skills. So if you want an unpaid internship, my answer is please get your resume done by a UN recruiter who actually did the hiring for the UN. There are tons of them on LinkedIn. Shooting a message, or you want to get in touch with me for the one that I use. He's based in Switzerland. He did hiring for the UN 15 years. You can get the resume ready, apply. And now if you don't get anywhere with an internship, work for a UN competitor organization and get the skills and the talent UN is seeking for and apply again once you have that experience. It's
Yeah, mine's short. I feel like she said it perfectly. Like, get someone. I have friends. All of my cohort mates in the program wanted to do international conflict resolution. I was the only one that wanted to do organizational stuff. They all work for the UN now, and all of them are like, we want to not work for the UN now. And so, but the way they got in was either through internships or also understanding that there's a specific framework for creating a resume that gets you noticed. So that is very much true, and I want to harp on that like there is stuff out there to teach you how to do that, because people, they have so many resumes, right? So you need to make sure that you follow a template.
So that is all the time we have today. Thank you both so much for sharing your experiences, your journey, and that you put the work in and were able to be successful. And for everybody else listening, thank you so much. And this link will be available on the NECR, the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution website. If you registered for the program, you'll get a link in your email. If not, please visit our website. Thank you all so much.